Okay, great work this week. So yeah, good question on the idea of the wrapping lines. So just as a you know basic description of what it is that we're doing with those. So for the wrapping lines, you're just drawing ellipses, and if there's lots of good exercises for practicing ellipses, whether it's just trying to take that ellipse and broaden it as it gets further away from that initial one until it becomes a circle. Or I've seen in some of those dynamic sketching classes, they'll just use a page of paper, like printer paper, and then inside draw some random diagonals emanating from the corner, and then use these as spaces to practice ellipses, so that you're having to get that same ellipse but slightly shorter in width every time. So I'm focusing here on trying to get the same basic view in terms of the perspective, but just getting it to be shorter. And you can see each one is not like, that's not a great ellipse, that's not great, it's a little wobbly. And so people will use these type of exercises to just kind of work on their ability to get those ellipses down. So this one I've started with a larger perspective by opening the ellipse, but doing the same thing, like trying to get it to be smaller each time. When they come to reference the figure, all you're saying with each ellipse is the direction and the degree to which one part or form is moving toward or away in space. So like, let's say this leg is going that way based on your ellipses. So you really can just use one to shorthand that whole development of perspective. The only thing you want to do in each one, which I didn't do a great job of over there, is you want them to be as similar as possible. So like if I put two or more ellipses, I want each one to be the exact same. Otherwise, it's like telling the viewer that your cylinder starts that, and then it gets flatter, and then it gets more curved again. So it's just kind of breaking the logic of the way that perspective is supposed to be moving. A trick for drawing them, though, is to always draw the whole thing, right? So I think if you just get used to drawing one, it's going to make it harder. Well, instead, I'll kind of start with a lighter touch and then draw the whole thing, and then just darken in terms of line weight what I want you to see, or the side that I want you to see. So in terms of just the criticism of some of the ellipses, that would be something that I'm seeing. But as far as where they're put, I think they're pretty successful. Like, yes, the rib cage does come forward. That's right. The pelvis would go back. So that's maybe something you can add. And that's starting to hint at that three-dimensional asymmetry of the body. You could throw a couple on for the arms. So that's it, but they're starting to work pretty well. So let's take a look at this pose and kind of give an example based on what you did. So here's our head. Careful on yours, the head's a little bit small. So for these, you'd want to get overall measurement to be about 8 heads or 7.5 heads total. So at least think of the head size as being something that you could repeat 4 times down to the pelvis, including the first one. So head is good, then cervical, thoracic, have a stretch. In gesture, there's not much you could do for a twist because it's still a two-dimensional representation. When it comes time to 3D, it's a lot more, like in this one, we would see the rib cage is pointing this way, and then the pelvis starts to point the other way. And when we have shapes that we can start to use, the way that I always treat this is with triangles, because the oblique will broaden and then narrow as it gets to the top. And then you could use that triangle and just flip it here, because on this side, because the oblique is pulling forward and out, you see it, and then it narrows because the pelvis turns away there. But that's something that we would need mass and overlap, or shape and overlap, to start to work with. So for now, you just do your best. You keep it in mind that it's a twist. If you feel there's a way that you could use the gesture lines to demonstrate that, by all means, go ahead. But it's not something that I'm going to be concerned about until I get to that next stage. So I got my thoracic, stretch, lumbar, pelvis, wrapping line over to where the weight-bearing side is. Make sure that, so I would double check where some of your lines begin and end. Like this doesn't really go anywhere in terms of what kind of line does it build off of. Remember, that's our important kind of systematic connection between all these, is that they have to kind of hold hands. So in this one, I tried to put it, I'm thinking of it more as a play off of this one. I think of those two. And then wrapping line, could keep those lines the same. Maybe a line for the knee, and then an S curve for the lower leg, and then the ground. And this leg goes back. And this side, maybe I could use that stretch line that I did between the abdomen. Maybe I could just use that. Get that nice long line there. Break it up at that connection point. Move that's kind of stiffened that too much. And then let's try to get these wrapping lines just to be a little bit more consistent. This goes further back, so it's a different perspective. And then let's take a look at the arms. So on this one, this shoulder line integrates with the neck. This goes back. I'm going to push that with those wrapping lines. Then it comes back up. And that's not with a dramatic perspective. Maybe a little curve for the hand. And then for this one with the shield, let's bring this arm down. Comes out a little bit. And then up. So that would be the kind of correction for that one. Let's take a quick look here. So I think very good. This one gets a little bit stiffer. So again, let's try to avoid in these lines that become too straight or near vertical. So for this one, I would do head. Here's the jaw. Cervical. Remember, each one's going to be a diagonal. Thoracic. Stretching. And stretching goes with the pelvis, so starts to pull back. Lumbar. Pelvis. No weight on this one, so it doesn't matter where you kind of build the pathway out for the torso. I'm going to go to this side. That relates to the C curve of the thoracic spine and the pelvis. Get some wrapping lines. This comes out slightly. Just whatever you do, avoid making a straight, because that's going to flatten the drawing. So I'll always favor a perspective, even if it feels like we're cheating. Knee, if I want to foreshorten a limb, I just make the line shorter. So that's the calf kind of going back, and then the foot. And then on this side, you know, I want to avoid too much of a straight. So let's maybe just kind of think of giving it a bit of a curvature in, and that goes back. And then just a wrapping line maybe for the lower leg to imply some kind of foreshortening, and then a shape for the foot back here. So there's the torso and legs, and then for the arm, let's build this off the neck. That's a pretty common thing that I'll do, is that shoulder has a relationship into the neck. This comes out, and then shorter forearm, and fingers, and then let's really push some wrapping lines to get that perspective to look different. And then on this side, the arm's tucked behind, so a little C curve. And then I'm going to use just the forearm right here. I don't like horizontal, the way that looks to the pose, so I'm going to give it a bit of a diagonal down. Remember, horizontals and verticals always just feel stiff or passive. So it's a great first start with these. Hopefully some of this feedback gets to those questions that you have.